Hi, everyone. I'm going to read journal number 12 in just a minute. Before that minute comes, a quick, like a non-traditional trigger warning. Nothing is going to be offensive, but I just finished sneezing right before hitting record. I sneezed hard and I didn't fully expel the urge. So if you see me cock my head back, like universal, here comes the like snotty Gale gesture, plug your ears because I don't feel like re-recording if that happens. The problem with having a camera that actually has a resolution that shows what I look like in something close to real life is the pixelated mess is one thing, but if I sneeze, I have to go blow my nose afterward. I wouldn't have to do that if it was just pixels because nobody could see it. And like I'm drinking coffee, that's what's in here because the day is young-ish, and I need an amount of caffeine and the ritual of coffee to make me alert and able to talk. The problem with coffee, though, is it's like a sepia filter. My countenance becomes coffee color, especially my mouth looks like an old Western photograph or like the original Game Boy or something. But all of that aside, if you see me cock my head back, plug your ears, and I'll try to hold it in. So number 12, journal number 12, this is about ranking fantasy media. Okay, it's a tier system. There's like a good tier and there's a crappy tier and there's stuff in between. And where do these things fall? And like by media, I don't mean movies or something like that. I mean all. We have new TV shows, like series, and we have ancient books. All of this falls into the same category. But electronic fantasy, when I was growing up, this hadn't come into maturity. I mean, it was pretty bad compared to literature, books, words on the page. This, if we're going to appraise its history and its participants objectively, Tolkien was late to the game. I mean, all due, and there's a lot of respect due, but and all of it to Granddaddy, he deserves the accolades, but he was not one of the first. I mean, like Oscar Wilde, it was my number one of all time. 1890, and that's when The Picture of Dorian Gray came out. And like Canterbury Ghost, one of his short stories, came out a few years before that. Oh, Bram Stoker's Dracula was coming out a little bit after. Mary Shelley was before that. Jonathan Swift was in the 1700s, 18th century, for first half of the 18th century, like Gulliver's Travels. And man, I talked about Shakespeare a lot, but by the time Shakespeare was born, okay, Chaucer was long dead, and Chaucer's reasonable to put into that fantasy genre. Poetry beyond that, when we're getting some more of the poetic works, there's tons of fantasy. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, right? Like Christabel and Kubla Khan and Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. There's 1,000 of these things that are not all by him, but there's 1,000 other works that would fall into this genre. And if you make your primary life goal to read the canon of fantasy literature that predates Tolkien, that's your life goal, and you eventually die of old age, people will show up to your funeral with fantasy works and put them in your coffin and say, look, you didn't get to this while you were alive, but in the afterlife, if you can still read, like if eyes work or something, then yeah, I hope you can continue your journey. This is old. But like when I was a kid, though, and I'm looking at electronic media, I mean, let me put it in perspective. Xena Warrior Princess. I mean, everyone knows what that is. That came out pretty much on my 15th birthday. And at that time, it was legitimately watchable compared to its competition, right? Compared to its competition. I mean, like Willow was on my list. The original Willow was on my list of the greatest fantasy, electronic fantasy of all time back then. And like ahead of Willow, I would put the music video for Weekend Dance If You Want to, that like Men Without Hats or whatever it is, that like Renaissance music video, I would put that on the list. Today we have, I mean, in TV, there's Carnival Row, there's Game of Thrones, there's a ton of TV, and in movies, obviously we have Lord of the Rings, and we have I mean, the adaptations like Harry Potter and the Miyazaki movies, and other Studio Ghibli entries, and there's so much, but the maturity of this is a recent development. Now, something that I'm not going to talk about in the actual fantasy journal itself is the thing that's most meaningful to me when I'm consuming, right, fantasy books, shows, especially books. It's the reason that Oscar Wilde is my number one, is it's not the story itself, right? It's not like, ooh, that was a really good, poltergeist or whatever. It's philosophy. Philosophy, teaching me a new perspective. That's what I really care about. And Oscar Wilde was the best at this. I mean, the stories are just, it's a framework, right, on which you can affix observations for life. It's like a coat rack. Okay, the plot is just a coat rack, and upon it you hang profundities for every weather. That's the most important thing to me. And with Oscar Wilde, I mean, put in his other works in there too, right? Um, Canterbury Ghost, that wasn't nearly as good, but like, okay, here's my hand. Okay, the thumb is your best finger. Okay, the pinky, not that good, but we permit residence on the same bit of anatomy. It's like there's Canterbury Ghost, right? There's Picture of Dorian Gray. Some of these middle ones are his plays that have no real fantasy in them other than the importance of being earnest or these plays. The wit is more supernatural than ghosts. So I almost allow those works into the kind of canon of pre-Tolkien fantasy as well. But with that, my wife just came in, but I'm going to keep recording. So if you hear a door and footsteps and stuff, that's my wife just got home. So I am going to read number 12, Saturday, December 11th, 2021, Fantasy Entertainment Tier System. Hi, everyone. Someday I plan to submit my work to the FETS, Fantasy Entertainment Tier System, to be ranked. It's a grading system I devised myself, but I suspect it's similar to how most people stratify their fantasy in 5 tiers in order: cherishable, so good, really good, pretty good, and not good. Let's begin at the top. The one that transcends the good strata, cherishable. What earns this class such irrational cherishing, at least for me, is that it serves as an emotional surrogate for some vital function in life. Lord of the Rings, for example, seems to satisfy a sort of atavistic desire for tribal adventure. I join a courageous fellowship on a long journey. We band together, dig deep, and in the end, prevail. And I get to do all of that banding, digging, and prevailing while reclined. Harry Potter fulfills a different function. It allows me to re-experience my coming of age. Every year, I can repass that rite and repeat its pangs, perils, and pleasures. There are only a few works that have passed my pearly gates and entered the kingdom of cherishable. I typically reunite with them on an annual basis. So Good has a lifetime appointment too, but not an annual one. It's closer to an Olympic cycle. Every 3 or 4 years, maybe 5, I spend a day with it, and I enjoy its company every time. Really Good is not a lifetime appointment. It is beginning to ended twice, watched twice, read twice, played twice, whatevered twice. There may be a third completion, but it would be several years later, and I wouldn't withhold any criticism out of reverence. Pretty Good is watched a single time. It's interesting enough to make it clear to the end, but not without missing some plot points. I mean major ones, because there are long periods of distraction in which I don't bother to pause, because distraction is the whole point. Often while I'm working, it helps to have something playing in the background, but that something has to be pretty good, or it'll make my work experience even more unpleasant. Rarely do I read anything in this category. This is the province of passive entertainments. Reading is active, so books either get promoted to really good or demoted to not good. Not good is attempted and discarded. This is the fate of most media, for me, for reasons I'll discuss in future journals. For the rest of this journal, though, can we talk about my writing? The actual process provides several suitable surrogates. Again, for me, it grants personal agency in an otherwise uncontrollable life. It permits exploration in an unfamiliar world. Like any good RPG, I can learn and grow and build. And like every frat pledgeling, I can insert myself into a community. I cherish each of these, but I would be a fool if I expected the sentiments of creation to be preserved in consumption. The writer and reader aren't connected in that way. In the end, the only thing that matters is the craft. So when the time comes, I'll see where my craft gets stratified, possibly into the sixth category. The one that I didn't describe, the black hole, that readerless abyss where most writing is sentenced to live out its days. Okay, that's all for today. Season's greetings to you too. I wrote that in December, where greetings for seasons were required. Okay, so I hope as you get on with your day that you dance, right, if you want to. If you want to. Bye, everybody.